Hi, I'm Bradie with QuiltCetera.com. I'm here today to show you how to square up your quilt to get it ready for binding. Now, the reason for squaring up your quilt is because you want to have nice straight edges and nice square corners in order to make the edge of your quilt lay flat. If you don't square up your quilts, you can end up with borders that don't lay flat. Your quilt will always be a little bit wavy. It's especially important for a quilt that's going to hang on a wall. That will keep it looking nice and flat against the wall, give it a nice picture look. I really like to do it because I find it makes my binding look better, and I really always look at the binding on quilts, so for me that's a really big thing. So what I've done here is I've laid out one corner of my quilt. I've got my square ruler. I buy a 12.5-inch square ruler because it's nice and big. And then I can do pretty much any size of block. There aren't many blocks that are bigger than 12, but occasionally you can get a 15-inch a 15-inch block. And there are up to, I believe, 50-inch rulers available these days, which are really nice for doing quilts. But I've got the 12.5 here today. So the border on my quilt is, let's just see to be sure. I think it's about 3 inches. So what I'm doing is I'm going to line up the 3-inch mark on my ruler along the inner part of the border. Once I do that, I'm going to check over here on the raw edge of my quilt and just make sure that the raw edge is pretty close to the end of the ruler, because I'm going to be cutting off everything that's there. Sometimes, even though your ruler is laying flat, the quilt will be a little bit buckled underneath, and you don't want that because then your squaring isn't going to be accurate. So while keeping the ruler held down tightly, I'm just going to pull at these raw edges and try and get them as close to the edge of that ruler as I can. Now I have a little bit of batting and backing hanging out, and that's what I'm getting rid of at this point. I've got my 3-inch marking line lined up with the beginning of the border, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this off now. And yes, I'm going to stand because that gives me a little bit better cutting power. Once I do that, it creates a nice clean edge along the quilt. Now, as you can see here, if I just went ahead and tried to put binding on there, it would be a mess. It would be totally out of whack, and it wouldn't look good at all. So what I want to do is create this really nice flat edge along the entire quilt that's going to make a really nice binding. So now that I've done that section, I'm just going to shuffle my quilt towards me, and I'm going to carry on this time with my longer ruler. I've now created that one little bit of straight edge, so I want to keep a little bit of that still on top of the table so I know where my cutting is. I'm going to continue to line up the 3-inch marking line on my ruler with the inner border along the rest of my quilt, and as I showed you before, I'm going to keep pulling it out. I don't want it to be squished under there, otherwise it won't be accurate when I cut it. And you can probably see that I'm pulling the batting a little bit, and that's okay because it's going to get cut off anyways. So once I have my inner border lined up nice and neat along there, and I've got the end of my ruler lined up with the line I cut previously, then I'm going to go ahead and continue to cut, and I'm coming up to the other corner on the far end. So what I'm going to do now is set my long ruler aside and go back to my square because it is the corner and it does have to be a nice 90 degrees. Now for this corner, I'm actually dealing with two sides here. They're meeting. So I want 3 inches here, and I also want 3 inches here. I'm not going to cut this yet. I'll turn the whole quilt before I cut that, but I just want to make sure that the line I'm cutting continues to be square. So once I get this side all lined up, and I know that that's in place, I'll finish up here, and that looks really good. So I'll zip that off. Then I'll take this quilt, turn it 90 degrees, and I'll start again in this corner with my square ruler. Now you can see here a bit of my backing fabric was folded under. So I'm going to come back with my ruler and trim that off. So we've all learned something there. Pay attention to where your backing fabric is. Okay, so as I said, you're going to lay out this square again, start in this bottom corner, continue up, and you're going to do all 4 sides of the quilt. Once I've done this, I can attach all the binding strips that I've already shown you how to piece together and how to cut, and my next tutorial will be about attaching that together. You can find all the tutorials for binding a quilt at quiltcetera.com, so I hope you'll visit us there, and please drop us an email and let us know what you think.